Hello, everyone. Let's do a quick mic check. I think I'm a little low, but I'll try speaking up. Let me just get chat out in the right place so I can see the chats. Alrighty. I feel like I'm getting something. What? Oh, all right. Alrighty. Think we're good. Hello. Oh, what? I think I can do something here to make this a little better. 1 second. Let me see. Um, I think this will do what I want it to do. Or not. Okay, one more time. I thought that's what that was. Oh, maybe it's this. All right, let's see now. Yeah, that's not the effect I was going for. That's weird. Oh, wait, is it this? Okay, that's not right. 1 second. Sorry. I was trying to make it so it can actually zoom in a bit because I have the camera further away than I did before. I don't know why the shaking. Sorry about this. For anyone watching the, what's it called? The, what is it called? Oh my God. I'm blanking on it. The VOD, that's it. VOD. Why is it so shaky like that? I don't understand. You're going to shake again? Yeah. Okay. Oh, that is too close. I don't like that. Also good to know that my hair needed to be fixed. That's unsettling. Uh, do not like that. That's tolerable, I guess. Especially if I go back further. Yeah, I guess. What about I said it too. That's all right. We'll do this and see if it starts shaking again. Okay, it's not shaking. So that's a start. All right. Sorry about that. I just realized that it was like I was really far away from the camera. Because what I used to do is I used to put the camera above my painting. Um, but at the moment I have it a little further away. Right now it's right in front of, well, right next to, like, camera's right there and chat's right there. So anyways, that is all. All right. Now that that is all set, get back to the painting. So at the moment in this painting, I am using my what's it called? Nickel azo yellow, but I am going to have to use um, probably going to have to use my what's it called? Bismuth yellow to be able to reach the bright peak brightness of these of the dish gloves, dishwashing gloves, because uh, yeah, the azo nickel yellow is a really. I'm starting to think that it might be a really good, like, how can I phrase this? I don't know if I want to call it a primary yellow because I feel like it's less capable than the bismuth yellow. Um, However, it's cheaper than the bismuth yellow, and it's probably like 90% of the time, I would say, good enough. And also, um, kind of closer to what the yellow that you normally need. Because when I use bismuth yellow, I'm always having to mute the color, and this color is already muted comparatively. Um, so yeah, I don't know. It might be one of those things where it's like for most of the time it's a great um, primary, unless you're painting flowers or something, bright all the time. Other thing about the nickel azo yellow is that it's a if I remember correctly, so it depends on the obviously pigments are so like specific. Hey Des, is this a scene from Dexter? Oh, you weren't here at the last stream. No, it's not. I'll tell you exactly what it is in just a second. I don't want to lose my train of thought, but I'll happily explain it. Um, so nickel azo yellow is PY 150, and if I remember correctly, it has an extremely good light fast what's it called rating, and bismuth yellow does as well. And then there's also Hansa yellow, which is much cheaper than bismuth yellow. And I'll be honest, I have it as Windsor yellow because that's the paint I have is a Windsor yellow, but it's PY74, which is Hansa yellow. Um, and it is very, very good. Compared to bismuth yellow, is it's hard to say because every brand will be slightly different, but it's basically comparable to bismuth yellow. It might be better than bismuth yellow or maybe a little worse. However, not as light fast. It's got some problems with that. So, um, yeah. So I don't know that I could recommend it because of that. It's supposedly pretty good, but yeah, I don't know. I remember reading that it's got some issues. All right, now to address um, the scene that I'm painting. Says no, this is a still life painting. This is a still life. So I set this up in my kitchen. It's just a cutting board, a jar of jam, um, some what's it called, rubber gloves, dishwasher gloves, and a knife, and some jam on that spilled. Um, and there is a concept behind it, and it's a little dark and morbid, and I admit that. Um, I think I find the the like the dark and morbid part kind of funny because it's such a like simple still life of like very basic items, and I don't think I would recommend opening a jar this way. If but if the like inside gets sealed and you're trying, I could see someone doing that. I think there's probably better ways, but it could happen. But yeah, I know it kind of does remind me of um, the opening for Dexter in a way, a little bit. Now that you mention it, I wasn't thinking about that originally, but now that you mention it, yeah, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the opening for Dexter, where he's just like making breakfast. So I'm going to put out some of my bismuth yellow now, so I can drop in um, some marks to give me a better visual. What's the word I'm looking for? not scale because it's not size, but visual range, I guess, so that in my eye I can see how bright is my brightest bright and so on. Des says the eggs, haha, reminds me when you said that. Yeah, there's the eggs and then the Tabasco sauce that he like drips on it. And the I think it was a blood orange as well. Like all of that stuff. So yeah. So like I said, I know that this has some, you know, dark elements to it, but I, I like that because it's also like it's not, it's not dark at all. It's just like opening up a jar, which is, very mundane. So I don't know. I like the combination of the two. Okay. So this is essentially my brightest yellow right here. Everything else, everything that isn't my brightest yellows on this, I need to tone down, which won't be a problem technically because as long as I use the nickel azo yellow, it can't reach that. However, um, the other colors like the white can, so it's good to keep that in mind. Des says, just went for a walk in 94% humidity. My lungs. I think that's a swim, technically. I'm not sure. I don't know the technicalities, but that sounds like a swim. But yeah, I talked about this in my last stream, um, and but so I apologize to anyone if I'm repeating myself. But I generally speaking find still lifes to be pretty boring. They're not my thing. I don't love them. I just generally kind of find them boring. So trying to figure out a way of making a still life painting interesting was has always been kind of a challenge for me. Um, so I'm not done with my Kintsugi series. I'm still working on that. However, my paintings right now need to dry before I can put on the gold leaf to finish them. And then the next couple paintings, I probably need to do some photo shoots for, and I haven't figured that out or worked that out yet. So while I'm kind of dealing with all of that, I thought, oh, let's try this idea, which I've had for quite a while. So I was like, might as well try it. I went to my went to the kitchen, set up a light, and you know, did an impromptu photo shoot kind of thing. And I um, have an idea for a couple more still life paintings that I need to do photo shoots for. But those are a lot easier to do photo shoots for, generally speaking, because I can, what's it called? It's just me and some objects, whereas for a photo shoot with for a a portrait or something else, I usually need people. Hey, Cookie Monster, how you doing? Welcome. How are you doing today? Did I miss the gold leaf on the self-portrait? No, you did not. That is drying right now. That that painting has to dry before I can put the gold leaf on, because if I try to put the gold leaf on while it's wet, what's going to happen is the gold leaf is randomly going to attach itself to everywhere. Now, I don't mind some randomness to it. Like I embrace some degree of randomness. But there's a difference between, some randomness and it just like going on in, just patches of pure, like the whole square and so on. So yeah. So that one and the previous one that I don't want to say finished because it's not finished, but it's at that stage where it's just drawing. And Cookie Monster says, "Ah, yes, of course, yeah, yeah." So that's where it's at right now. So I'm just leaving them to dry at the moment. And then I have some more. Oh, oops, no, that is way too bright. I have some more still life ideas, but some not still life kintsugi ideas that I was saying. I probably am going to have to do like arrange a photo shoot for them, and that's a little more involved. So I'm trying to figure that out. I've been very limited on time lately. So in the meantime, I decided to do a still life painting, and I was talking about the fact that I don't usually find still life paintings all that interesting, like doing them. I find them kind of boring, honestly. So trying to figure out a way of making a still life painting interesting, you know, I came up with this concept. So um, so yeah, and then I have some more ideas for still lifes as well that are kind of in the same series, and those ones will I also need to do photo shoots for, but it's a lot easier for me to do a photo shoot for still life, um, than it is um, for the kintsugi where I need like a model and everything. So, so yeah. Uh, but yeah, trying to make still lifes interesting is always been challenging. When I was in art school, I found them really tedious and boring. And there's such a good way of practicing but they're just boring. So yeah, just trying to find ways of making them interesting, at least to me. Hey, Donley, welcome. Oh, Don Lee. I'm meant to message you, but I can just talk about it now. So, oh wait, Don Lee says, "Oh, tedious and boring. All right, now we're talking. That's my type of stream." Cookie Monster says, "I painted an apple today. LOL." Yeah, I, I mean, apples can be difficult. Flowers are really difficult to paint, but just because something's difficult doesn't mean it's in something you like doing or enjoyable. I mean, it makes it more likely if for when it comes to painting, because if something's challenging, at least it's challenging and interesting in that manner. But yeah, I don't know. I find a lot of it just meh and boring. But yeah, I've done apples. I mean, when I went to my first art school, I don't know, first art school, my first art classes, I took art classes with this crazy Russian dude, um, who was a really good artist and really good teacher, but it's crazy. And like one of my first things was to do like a drawing in a pencil of like it was like a cone and a cylinder type of thing. It's just so boring. It was just like a white cast of those things. So it's just I don't know what it was made out of. It's just so boring. Very useful, but yeah, not something I would like to do a lot. Um, Cookie Monster says it was a good excuse. It was good exercise in shadow, light, and 3D effect. Absolutely, 100%. That's what they're really good for. And also scale, and if you do it in colors, color matching. Like these are all useful things, but it can be very boring. Um, but yeah, the things it was like these white, cast things, and I was doing it in pencil, and it took me like 40 hours to do this one drawing because of how specifically we had to do it. Very, very boring. You bought supplies today to make monoprints and printing technique using black ink. Well, that's cool. Donnelly says, I'm a fan. I'm an apple fan, especially when baked into a pie, crunchy, crumbly topping. Those are very useful too. Yes, absolutely. Oh, you didn't forget the vanilla ice cream? I mean, it's a lot of texture and everything to get right in vanilla ice cream. So yeah, for sure. Um, but yeah, the way, just to kind of finish up the story, the way I would have to do these drawings in pencil. If this was a regular pencil, obviously the colored pencil, but if it was a regular pencil, we'd have to keep it sharp, like super sharp, hold it from the back end, and you would do the drawing like this. So you're just gently toning the paper, and gently building up the graphite on it. And when you had to erase, you couldn't use a regular eraser. It would be too harsh and obvious. You had to use a kneaded eraser, and you could only like dab at it and so on. It was really quite the exercise to do. But like I said, he was a crazy, crazy teacher. Cookie Monster says, now you made me hungry." Sorry. Um, Go eat a snack. Says, was the teacher wearing armor? Because I'm sure he'd be the victim of many stabbings. No, he did not. Um, but yeah, he was also the teacher who was like, when you first, what's it called? When you first start, like when you first took art classes, you'd start in pencil, and then from pencil, you'd move immediately to watercolor because watercolor was the hardest, so you might as well start there. That was that was his logic. Barry, hello. How are you doing? Des says, sounds like he wanted to torture everyone. I mean, I don't know, honestly. I was a teenager at the time. I ended up having to stop uh I ended up having to stop taking classes with him because apparently uh, I pissed him off so bad that I basically I wasn't like thrown out, but he got so angry and it became such a big deal that after that I didn't feel comfortable being there. So yeah, because what what happened was he ended up um, he ended up trying to remember exactly the exact time that it happened, but I can't remember. I can't recall the exact moment or whatever the class was. But basically, I was struggling with something, and he ended up doing it all for me. And so I didn't really want to take the painting home as my own because I'm like, it's not my painting anymore. You know, he did everything. So then if I remember correctly, I'd asked him to try and explain it to me instead of demonstrating it for me. Um, and that infuriated him, and things didn't go well after that. Like I said, I don't think it was very stable. And I was like 15 or 16 at the time, so it's not like I was, um, I mean, it should have been a minor thing, but yeah. Okay, Monsters LOL, not a very great thing to make that into a problem as a teacher. It seems like something that shouldn't be a big deal, as a teacher. And it's not like I was super rude about it or anything. I mean, I have no recollection of what I said by any means, but I wasn't looking to like get into a fight. I was just like, hey, can you tell me instead of showing me because I want it to be my painting, uh, the gist of it, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, I feel like that's reasonable. Um, a reasonable thing to request of a teacher overall. Like, if he, I mean, also, what's the point of demonstrating it if you can't articulate it, right? Because, like, if you can't articulate it, then it's not exactly, I mean, don't get me wrong, seeing demos can be helpful, but, like, you know, articulating it is also super helpful to understand what you're demonstrating, you know? Like, I don't know, it seems pretty basic, but whatever. Like I said, he was a crazy guy. I'm trying to remember, like, his classes were, I mean, it was, it was just art classes, like independent art classes type of thing. Um, I remember there was one painting that he was working on, and I think I went once a week or twice a week or something like that, and like he changed the background on that painting like 5 times. Not that that means anything about him being sane or not. I just remember just something that stands out because he was painting in oils. We had to paint in watercolors, but he would paint in oils. Cookie Monster says a teacher should ask first. Yeah, I think a teacher should ask for. I shouldn't just like grab the brush or pen out of your hand and like start working on your on your piece for you. Um, Actually, to juxtapose it, I had another teacher who this was years later. He would sometimes do something kind of like that. Only he was way more what's the word? He would ask first and everything. But basically, he ended up doing way too much on one of my paintings. Like a little something here or there or whatever, not a big deal, but he ended up doing way too much on it. So finally, I was like, hey, you know what? If you don't mind, could you just finish the painting and sign it for me? Because I would love to have one of your paintings. And this is no longer my paintings. Like I can't, you've done I keep, I'm not at this level. I couldn't feel comfortable taking credit for this. So would you mind just finishing it and then I can have it? And he was like, sure. And he had no problem with it. And then he finished it and I own it now. It's a sketch painting. It's not like a super, you know, high level painting, but I own it. It's been years since I've even looked for it, but theoretically, it should be where I left it last. Actually, now I'm like, oh, I should probably go find it. Um, says no, Don Lee says I had a manager that would do that. He'd just start doing the work for you. Then at one point, I was training someone, and I made sure to let them do the work, but be ready if they had questions. Yeah. Uh, and Donnelly says I trained them well enough that they took my job. That's not good. I'm sorry to hear that, man. This says if he used a different paper or canvas, that would be better. Yeah, sometimes you can't though because it needs to be like on the on what's already there for it to like matter. And I get that. I'm not crazy. I understand, and it's not a big deal. Um, and if he couldn't, like if he couldn't articulate it, then he could also say that as well. But instead of any of that, he just got pissed, and it became a whole thing. Barry says that's quite the lore drop. Who, Don Lee or me? Because I mean, I don't know how much of what that qualifies as lore, but yeah, just crazy stuff. Um, art history is weird because like you have people in art history who did paintings and they would have their like what's it called students and stuff do a lot of the painting, but yet it's still like the teacher's painting, you know. But for um I don't know. It's just different. I think like I feel like for that, first of all, it's usually a scale issue that they're dealing with, and it's one way of dealing with the scale issue. And then, that those people have the final say because it's their painting their name on it. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have a problem with art, not studios, but like artists who have other people do most of their artwork at like a factory. I feel like it's different when you're a teacher teaching your, yeah, or, what's the word I'm looking for? Not just trainee, but back in the day it was the word I'm looking for. I'm totally blanking on the word, but it wasn't just like students, it was apprentice, that's the word I'm looking for. They were like your apprentices. It's different uh system at the time. But yeah, Don Lee, you're gonna one day tell that story about your job. Uh, I'm sorry to hear that overall, but interesting nonetheless. Uh, More spam. All right, all right. I've messed around with the gloves enough. Let's lighten up the cutting board a bit. Don't worry about it, Donley. I got it. Thank you, though. I appreciate it. At some point, I'm also going to have to figure out what I'm doing for the countertop because the countertop is like uh, granite or something, and it's just a mess of texture, and I don't know how I'm going to handle that. I might end up using a sponge because I do have a natural sponge. That might work actually. That might actually work pretty well. But if I do that, I probably want the white on top of it. So I should probably tack darken it all right now. All right, so let's do that now. So the countertop is like I said, it's like a granite and it has all this different texture running through it. So it's not really this dark, but it does have elements that are like very dark. So I'm gonna put it in because covering the dark areas with like the mid gray is going to be a lot easier than um, covering the mid gray with the dark color. Barry says, I've got to go. The rest of the day awaits me. Hey, no worries, Barry. Have a good rest of your day and have a good 4th of July weekend if you're in the States. I don't know if you are. But yeah, I know that's coming up and yeah, wishing everybody who celebrates. Just realized I'm probably going to have to get the sponge out a lot sooner than I planned because painting all this in this dark is going to mess with my perception of the colors pretty bad. The thing about color, um, it's, if I remember correctly, it's color, value, and saturation. Uh, I guess it wouldn't be color, it'd be hue. Value and saturation is where we don't see them independent. It's relative. The way our brains and our eyes perceive it, it's relative to what's near it. You can kind of train yourself to be more, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Or less relative about it. Like there are ways that you can train yourself by like isolating areas and so on. It's really difficult to keep that in mind with the whole painting. Um, so if I, as I do this, it's going to be much harder for me to accurately decide, what um, the white of the cutting board should be, and so on. This is, we had Canada Day celebration yesterday, and the fireworks lit a marsh on fire. We have a burning ban across the province, but they still set off the fireworks. Yeah, and then had to go to get many crews out there to put out the fire. Yeah, I feel bad for the wildlife. Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we suffer with here. Both the potential for fire, which I hate, obviously, um, and then the animals get scared. All our animals get scared from the fireworks, and I'm sure all the wildlife get terrified from the fireworks. But you know, um, and where we actually like we have bans where you're not supposed to do fireworks in like neighborhoods, like stuff like that. But people literally will do it like outside my front lawn, you know, and it's really infuriating, especially because it puts all of us in danger, Like, I like fireworks, they're fun, but, idiots exist. And just because you think you're going to get it right and it's not going to go into my house doesn't mean you're right about that. I don't trust you, you know? I don't know who you are, who's like these idiots doing it, Like you shouldn't do it like, 10 feet from my home. But they do, and uh, anytime someone calls the police on them, if the police even bother to show up, because they don't really always bother for fireworks and stuff like that, people get really pissed. And so if they're your neighbors, now you've pissed off your neighbors and you've got a bad, you know, uh, what's it called, environment with your neighbors because they were, you know, thoughtless and rude. Like, just go drive out somewhere further away. Why you got to do it, outside the house? Even if it wasn't dangerous, which it is, even if there was no danger, it's so loud and it freaks out the animals, And people have pets. Like, come on. And it is a danger, and it's a fire hazard, and on and on. And technically illegal for all those reasons. Yeah, people still do it. Infuriating. All right. This says my chihuahua started barking and that set off my elderly dog who can't really hear them. Oh, I'm sorry, Des. All right. 1 second. I'm going to get my sponges. I've never used these sponges, but in theory, should work. So these are artist sponges. These are natural sponges, if I understand it correctly. Don't quite know how I will be able to, like, I don't think I'll be able to, well, I don't know how much reusability I'm going to get out of these, is guess what I'm trying to get at. Misu, little girl. My cat, one of my cats looked like she was coming in and then disappeared. All right, I guess I'll try this one. I'm not, like I said, I've never used these, but the theory is pretty simple. Using it like a stamp, essentially. Hold on a second. What's going on? Good for now, thank you. All right. All right, before I do that, let me take a sip of my drink. All right. Oh, I'm gonna have to mix up color I'm gonna need. Uh, okay, just checking. All right. Sorry you can't see my palette today. Anytime I work on paintings that are like this proportions, it's harder for me to show my palette unless I zoom out a lot, and then you can't see the painting. Can't see much of the painting then. But all I'm doing right now is I'm trying to mix up the like the granite texture. Cookie Monster says, so Leah, did you come up with this image yourself, or is it based on a photo reference of some kind? Well, it is based on photo reference, but it's a photo reference I took. So this is these are my dish gloves and uh, jar of jam and everything. I set it up in my kitchen and I took a photo of it. I took more than a photo, but I took a bunch of photos and did that. So the idea is just like it's just a cutting board and a jar of jam. The idea is like using wearing gloves and using a knife to try and to open a jar or something. Um, Obviously, it can be read differently, but that's what I like about it. To me, that's the fun part about it, right? That it has like double meaning, or if not double meaning, double ways of reading it, right? And Des was comparing it to the opening of Dexter, and I kind of like that too. Did I make a peanut butter and jelly afterwards? Actually, no, I didn't. Not that day. I did that. I think I did that the day before, actually. But yeah, Cookie Monster says, "Haha, you found an interesting topic." Well, that was what I was trying to. That's what I was saying earlier about the still lifes. I don't find still lifes very interesting, but I was able to. I think this is kind of interesting, and that's where that whole topic was about. Is that yeah? I think I do think this is interesting because it you can interpret it in a few ways, um, and I don't know this. Like I said, I find it interesting. So finally, a still life that is um, keeping my interest. I have a couple more planned actually. Donley says, "Love Dexter back in the day." I know they brought it back, but I didn't see any of those. I haven't seen the new one either, and I didn't. I never finished season 5. I think that's the last season. I basically never finished it. It kind of started. Um, I didn't like the direction it was going, and I stopped watching. Like I lost interest in it. I was intended to go back to it. There's a few shows like that. Like there's Dexter, and then I think it was True Blood. I also stopped watching, and then I also never saw I think I stopped watching at season 3 of Breaking Bad. Not out of boredom. I just it was not the right time for me to at the time. I was going through a lot, and I was just like, I don't want to deal with this show right now, and I never got back to it, unfortunately. That says the last season was a bit wacky and ended all weird. Yeah, yeah, I heard. Like I said, it started getting wacky for me already, and I was just like, whatever. All right, let's see. Let's see if this works out. It might not, but we'll give it a try. Cookie Monster says, "You know Johnny Bravo cartoon?" Yes, I do. I do know Johnny Bravo cartoon. You loved that, and Dexter too, of course. Yeah. If you mean Dexter's Laboratory, yeah, absolutely. Can't say I'm thrilled with this result yet. We'll see. This was very much an experiment. I've never done this before, so Only says there. Oh, well, there was a bit of confusion back in the day with those two Dexters and Dexter's Laboratory were airing at the same time. Yes. Okay. Well, this was a great learning experience. I think the conclusion is that even though generally you go light over dark, in this case, I think the light parts are more than the dark parts. So I think it'll be better to go over it with the dark parts again. However, it might just be like a multiple pass type of thing, going back and forth. Either way, not it's a interesting what's it called? Result and something I can learn from. Very messy though, I will say that. All right. Conley says, wish they had different colors assigned for people's names in chat. That's another thing Twitch does better. Yeah. There's a lot of things that Twitch does better. Um, unfortunately, there's a lot it does worse, you know? Okay, was not the look I was hoping for, but like I said, it's good to learn, and now I think I know how I'm going to handle this at least, you know? So, and don't mind more texture in my painting either. So, not a bad thing. One of the reasons I used to do the whole, and I still do it sometimes, but the whole thing with the what's it called, the brayer, like it adds texture, it adds randomality to things, and also it just makes me, makes for me personally makes me less precious about every element and so on. Yeah. All right. Don't quite know how I'm going to store this, but we'll put it down for now. The sponge effect is good. Yeah, I think so. I think it's interesting. And like I said, I think I'll use it again later with some of the darker colors. But I do think I will wait a while to let it um, dry off more. Oh, I was going to say this earlier, but I got sidetracked. Only I started listening to Dungeon Crawler Carl. Um, there's elements of the book series that I like, elements that I'm a little about, but it's getting a little bit better. But it's fun. It's a fun, enjoyable uh, series. You said you're listening to the audio version? Yes, I am listening to the audio version. The narrator is really good. Yeah, the voice actor keeps getting better and better. You think I'll enjoy it the further I get into it? Thanks. I mean, yeah, so far I am enjoying it more the further I get into it. I think the issue I have with it is I'm not crazy about like the overarching premise of it, and how it gets implemented, like but that's like the main thing that I'm not like loving. I don't know how much, I don't want to ruin it for people, but um just how the immediate transition from like regular Earth to the thing, and like how all that happens. I don't know if there's going to be a twist later on, but like that whole thing kind of, I don't know, it didn't sit all that right with me. Just, I don't know. But that's the main thing. That's not the story itself as much as like the, I guess, premise of the story, if that makes sense. Monster Leah, do you think there is such a thing as a real artist, or are different people simply more or less creative? Uh, I mean, yeah, generally speaking, I think it's more an issue of like, I don't even want to say some people are more, well, okay, definitely some people are more creative than others. Absolutely. Like that's just the way it is. But um what is more creative, you know, is a it's a vague concept, right? And you know, creativity can mean a lot of different things. It Defining what is art, what is artistic, what is creativity, these are really hard things to kind of parse, um, because a lot of um, a lot of the there's always like exceptions to the rule, and also what the rule is, just changes a lot depending on this, like who and what. The book Fear and Art, I think, is a really good book, and it kind of touches on that, but it's really hard to say, you know. Um, Don Lee says it's a specific genre that the gamification of life that this story is fitting in. That's fair, Don Lee. Des says, Cookie Monster, you always come up with the most random philosophical questions. Yes, but I enjoy them. Yeah, so it's a tough thing. Like, what is, because the thing is, like, when you say, is there such a thing as a real artist? Anybody who makes art is a real artist. Like, that's the easy way to, that's the easy answer, right? Um, and I do think there's truth to that, in the sense that, like, you know, um, if you make art, you're an artist, and I encourage people to make art. However, there it gets complicated, because, like, what is art? People people say, oh, someone's an artist with, something that is like not art related a lot of times, but, and you can be creative in fields. The other thing is, you can be creative in fields that aren't artistic, right? Like, even even computer science, when you're like programming something, you can have creative solutions to something. Math, physics, they people have been creative in those in those subjects, coming up with creative solutions for problems and so on. That's a certain type of creativity. So it really starts to get muddy, if depending on everything that you include, right? Um, so it depends how you want to take it. Um, but I will say realistically, I do think that there's a difference between someone who, you know, paints occasionally, and I mean occasionally, not regularly, and does it for fun. I think that's fantastic. Don't get me wrong. I think there's something artistic to it for sure. And in a way, yes, they're an artist. But if they're not practicing at it, they're not studying it, they're not trying to improve necessarily, would I consider them an artist? Not, maybe not as much, you know. Um, However, if they are trying to do all those things and they just don't have the time and they rarely draw or paint or whatever, but they still are doing all the things, like surrounding it, then yeah, I would say they're still an artist. Doesn't matter that you're not, very active. Sometimes you can't be, right? Um, Generally speaking, I think people, generally speaking, I come across people who are more harsh on themselves than people who are more forgiving to themselves as far as this subject goes. I've heard more people say, "Oh, I wouldn't call myself an artist," way more than I've heard people say, "Oh, I'm an artist," and then they like never do anything. Only people really who say that are like the AI bros who create, um, who do, AI art, and they're like, "Oh, I'm an artist," and they're like, "Yeah, no, you're not." Everyone else is more harsh on themselves. Even when they are artists, they don't consider themselves artists because it's like, oh well, I don't do this professionally, so I'm not an artist. And it's like, yeah, well, you don't have to you don't have to do it professionally to be an artist, right? And there are some master artists from history who like wouldn't have qualified as artists, by like those standards, right? Like there's some artists in from art history that like barely sold a painting in their lifetime, right? And had to do a different job and were sustained by family members. And like, yeah, they wouldn't qualify as artists either, right? Like, I mean, by like those standards, you know? I mean, I think Van Gogh technically wouldn't have even qualified as an artist by like depending on the standards you decided on, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, no one thinks Van Gogh wasn't an artist, right? Pretty Monster says, I'm not sure I'm an artist. I only dedicate my life to it. LOL. Yeah, right? There you go. The thing is, like, some people are weird though, like about art too. They will, you know, they're so I haven't come across this a lot, but there are people who are like so interested in it, but then will not like do it. They won't make art. They'll just think about making art, and I know those people exist. And I don't understand that, but whatever. Um, I understand some people. There's a difference between loving art and loving to make art. Those aren't the same thing, and they can be separate. So some people just love art, but they don't love making art, and that's fine too. There's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't that I understand, right? Like I love music, and I would if I had the time. I would love to learn to make music, but I don't, right? But that doesn't take away from the fact that I still love music. So people can love art and not make it, but there are some people who like want to make it and then just never do. That I don't quite understand, but whatever. I did this painting of cake, and I actually sold it, and of a slice of cake, and that the it was an exercise to see if I could take something that was kind of boring and make it interesting, and I think I did that. Um, I didn't find the experience very interesting. I just think the painting came out interesting. But I do think I need to keep that in mind as I'm painting this painting and not try to do a little more to it than just like copy the reference. You know what I mean? And I think that messing it up quite a bit was a great start, as it often is. I do. I will. I don't know that this is. I mean, I don't know. Trying to think of like how to relate this to what we were talking about. I think it's just the idea that like, so I've dedicated my life to art, and yet my like art history is pretty abysmal. And I do think that like I would like to learn more about art history, and I just need to find the right resources for it, because some history stuff can be super boring if it's not presented the right way. In art, when my art school was not a like university, and so they focused on um, practical skills. They didn't really teach much in the way of art history. We touched on it a little here and there, but not much. And when I was younger, I definitely wouldn't have found most art history very interesting. I still, depending on who, how it's presented, will get bored of it pretty fast too. Conley says, I wish I had a better memory for names and dates. Same. History and I didn't get along that great. Yeah, no, I'm the same way. I cannot remember dates or names very well at all. I have like real problems with that. So yeah, I definitely struggle with all of that when it comes to like studying something. Hi, Dresden. Are you coming in here, little boy? Little boy. Dresden. No? He's like, no. I am going somewhere else. Just walked off. He is a cat after all. Even though I think of him as a dog sometimes, he is definitely a cat. Speaking of Dresden, I finished one of Dresden's namesake's book last night, The Small Favor Story. Uh, and wait, Small Favor. Which one is that? I think there is one book of short stories when it comes to the Dresden Files that I haven't read. Um, I think. I think because it was just like overpriced and I didn't. I was like, yeah, I'm not spending a whole credit or whatever on a book that's like 2 hours or whatever it was. Stretch. Oh. Donley, what book are you on as far as dungeon crawler Carl? One second. One second. Hey, little boy. Yeah, dressed and it was the one where he's tasked with saving an enemy crime boss that his friend ends up fighting a bunch of fallen angels. I'll have to look it up. I don't remember that one. Little boy. Um, yeah, I'm on book 3 of Dungeon Crawler Carl. He's so cute. Dresden, you're so cute. Conley says Queen Mab makes him save the boss and his good friend, that is the knight, gets shot. Oh, I remember that one. I remember that one. That was a hard one. Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah, because his friend getting shot, that was rough. I will say there's a book later on where it there's a few books later on where some things happen, and like one of those things where it's like I think some of this happened because the writer, like the story had been going on for so long. I think the writer wanted to adjust things, and so they adjusted it, but it I didn't necessarily like how the writer went about it, but you know, I think overall it'll be a good thing kind of thing, but it's like I wish he had done it a little differently, but I get it. You finished the most recent book in the Dungeon Crawler series and started over with the first book. Which is the most recent book? I didn't even look. I didn't even see what number they got up to. What is it, Tristan? Do you know? Okay. His claws are in my forearm. The writer for the Dresden is very creative, but you have issues with him. He's sometimes clumsy with his storytelling. Yeah, he he is definitely, and he also falls into the trope, um, which I get it. A lot of books and movies do this, but it's sometimes a little inconsistent. Where like he tells the story from like I think I would categorize it as like from Dresden's perspective, right? Like the story is basically 100% from his perspective, right? Um, but then there are moments where he cuts from like the planning stage where they're about to talk about the plan to the event, and then he does a bunch of stuff that they had planned, but we missed that planning stage, so it's like a surprise for us, which is can be interesting and satisfying, but it kind of ruins the narrative because in the sense that like that doesn't happen in any other part of the book, you know, where they like don't tell it from his perspective kind of thing. I know a lot of books do that. I think almost every book that is in that genre kind of does that. But yeah, I just and it's every time, not every time, but a lot. And I think it kind of takes away from it eventually. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if I did a good job explaining it, but yeah. He also used to write the trope of Dresden being an unreliable narrator, but it feels rough the way he handles it, in my opinion. Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said, I like the books a lot, but there are some issues. You know, it's definitely not perfect, but I still really enjoy the books. I will say the other thing is and this is not just for the Dresden Files, but any writer, if you like read their books back to back, or you know, I listen to them, but if you listen to them back to back, uh, there's there's a few like phrases and idioms and stuff like that that they really like to use over and over and over again. And after a while, it's like, okay, okay, buddy, I get it, but come on. Donnelly says, "Ooh, what you make, does. I can be right over if you need me to help eat anything." Okay, Donnelly. By the way, I don't know if I finished talking about it, but Cookie Monster, did I finish addressing your question about creativity and artists, or was there more there? I thought I pretty much addressed it, but I sometimes get sidetracked, especially when streaming. It's a lot harder to paint, talk, and stream at the same time. Um, it definitely can take away from some of my cognitive load and make me a little more scattered than usual. Conley says, "LOL, this is a pretty funny slash potentially disturbing painting." Yeah, that was kind of the point. Um, like I said, I have a few more uh, ideas for um, basically a series of still life paintings that all have this overarching theme. Oh, a series, yes, a series. So I have my series of the kintsugi paintings, which obviously focuses on people, and I thought it would be nice to do a series of still life. That way, I have something I can work on when I can't work on the portrait. Well, they're not portraits, but on the figurative stuff. Emily says, "Nice, thank you." Yeah, I think it's a good idea to have like you know more than one thing going on at the same time, as when it comes to painting, especially oil painting. Because sometimes you have to wait for stuff to dry. Sometimes you need to, you know, prime things and wait for that to dry or whatever it is. It's nice to have like multiple things going on at the same time. Of course, I do have a bunch of paintings that I need to go back to and uh, finish, and I don't know when I'm going to do that. Um, yeah, we'll see. I will say it's tough going back to paintings once it's been, you know, a certain amount of time. I At least for me, I find it difficult. Like, you know, it's one thing if you put a painting aside for like a couple weeks, even a couple months, and then come back to it. But if it's been like more than a couple months, or it's been like a year or something like that, trying to go back to that painting, it's tough. But I do have a couple that I really would like to get back to, so we'll see. But yeah, I will say, going back to the subject of creativity and artists and all that, um, I did really enjoy the book, Art and Fear, and I think they bring up a lot of interesting things. And I think it can be something that like, um, I mean, you know, not all of it is completely relevant to today, maybe because it's an older book, but most of it I think is still very relevant, and there's a lot of interesting stuff in it. Um, you know, I'm not sure I would agree with everything that the writers said, but that's not really an issue, right? Like, it's not a big deal. Um, so yeah, I thought it was a good book. What's that? Art and Fear? Yeah, by who? I don't remember who wrote it. I can look it up later. But yeah, it's Art and Fear. It's an older book. I think it's like from the 70s or something. Um, but you can find it in a here, at least, in you can find it in at the library, or yeah, multiple. A lot of libraries have it, and yeah, it's not hard to find. Welcome back, Donnelly. Sorry, your internet cut out. All right, Donnelly. Glass is such an interesting thing to paint, um, in general, but it's a lot more interesting, I think, when it's clear, or yeah, I guess clear-ish, and you can see what's on the other side of it. In this case, it's not quite as I would say not quite as interesting, but you know, whatever. Yeah, do you see progress with your paintings over the years? Oh yeah, for sure. Although it is challenging sometimes. This is the I'll tell you a story in a second, but absolutely, I definitely see progression in my painting over the years. Um, I do think that at some point it transitioned a little from like I would say in the last I don't know how many in the last couple years. I will say that I don't know that the improvements have been as much. Well, okay, it gets complicated. So let me get into it. Cookie Monster says, "Cool, me too." That's great. So all right, let's get into it. So in the last couple of years, I will say that I don't think that my progression has been as I don't think it's been as much about like my technical skills, often referred to as like my hard skills, because it's the technical ability to like paint, better or draw better. Like I'm not saying I haven't seen improvement in that. I have, but it's been less. It's more about what you do with those skills. I think that's been probably the biggest shift for me in the last couple of years, and the most growth and improvement. I think. I will say, like in general, right? This is a generalized statement. As you get better with your technical skills, your improvement, your your overall improvements get smaller and smaller. And this isn't just in art, right? Like I mean, this is in a lot of things. An easy, simple one is like if you've ever gone on a diet, or people who have been on diets, like if you have a ton of weight to lose, it's a lot easier to lose weight whereas if you have very little weight to lose, it's a lot harder. And you know and it's with everything. Like when you know if you start like if you start running, right, and you haven't been a runner before, then you'll make, as long as you practice all the time, you'll start making huge gains really fast. But if you look at the Olympics, right, and you look at like the world records and everything, the improvements are always in like fractions of a second. Not even, they're not even shaving off whole seconds. They're like fractions of a second at that point, because they're at the like absolute peak of what they can do. And that kind of goes to like your improvement, I think, or people's improvement in art too, right? At some point you get to the point where your technical skills, I'm not going to say they're as good as they're ever going to be, because that is definitely not the case, but they're as good as you might be interested in making them at the moment, or they're as good as you will put the energy to improve them, and you kind of plateau at that like skill quality, right? But there's there's also the like soft skills in art of like, okay, now that you can draw a person, great. I'm talking about figurative because that's what I do, but like anything. But like, okay, great. I can draw a person. I can do portraits. Cool. What am I going to do with that now? Like, how do I take that and make something more, right? And then what also happens a lot of times when you do that is, let's say, you do that, and then, to give an example, let's say I do that and suddenly I want to draw, or I want to do a painting of someone in a garden for some reason. Let's just say, right? Well, then I'm going to hit us. What's going to happen is I'm going to do that and I'm going to come up against a skill issue that I have, which is I don't paint on a lot of gardens, right? So how do I finish this painting? And then I have to practice that skill to get better at being able to paint a garden. And so there's always going to be holes in your abilities, but a lot of them are easy kind of to patch up as you go because your fundamentals are strong. Your fundamentals aren't strong, you're going to have a lot harder time patching up those holes. But yes, at some point it's not about your skill, and it's about like your artistic vision or what you're trying to say, or maybe not even what you're trying to say, but how you're trying to say it. So yeah, that, and like I said, the I'm not saying you don't improve your skills, but the jumps become smaller and smaller, uh, at least perceptually. And I think it's also like another thing that I think about, another way that I think about it is, um, that is kind of a thing about depth, in the sense of like when you're first starting out, you're learning, a lot of technical abilities and usually a lot of different things. And so you're covering a lot of stuff, but as you improve and get better and kind of focus, it it becomes less about like the surface of it, so less about like, can I make it look like a person, and more about like the the depth of the understanding. And even if it's like not, I mean, part of it's what you're trying to say, part of it's like the nuances that you develop, because there's so much like subtleties and nuances in art, especially the more you work on something, the more that comes out, or can at least. So yeah, there's a lot there. Donley says, "Yeah, okay, I got some skills. Now what?" Yeah. Oh no, he says, "Yes. Okay, I got some skills now." Yeah, exactly. It's a tough thing. It's like, what do you do with those skills now? Um, but yeah, and I told you I was going to tell you a story. So um, this is one of the reasons I think it's so important to keep uh, old drawings and paintings. I know a lot of people throw them away, but let me tell you a quick story. So at one point, this is years and years ago, um, I don't draw in sketchbooks a lot. I always found sketchbooks to be kind of intimidating because you want them, or I should say, I want them to be like perfect. I don't want a bunch of like failed drawings in them and so on, because like other artists show off their sketchbooks and they're like works of art, and so on. Also, a lot of sketchbooks, not the funnest to draw in or paint in. At that time, I wasn't really painting, but they're not the funnest to draw in either, especially if you're left-handed and the sketchbook happens to be spiral bound, and so on. But basically, all this to say, I don't do a lot of artwork in sketchbooks. But the reason this is relevant is because I did have a sketchbook that I took around with me, and I was very, very slowly filling it up, right? And it was a sketchbook that I had like stopped using and then started using and then stopped using and then started again and so on, right? And at one point I was like, man, I feel like I really haven't improved in the last like couple of years. I feel very, very stagnant in my artwork. And I started flipping through my sketchbook, and because I hadn't, because I was so bad at filling it up and I'd put it away and come back to it, some of the drawings, and I dated, this is the funny part, I dated some of the drawings, which I hadn't, I wasn't really in the habit of doing that, but I did do it a couple times. And I look back at the sketchbook and I'm like, man, I have gotten so much better in the last couple of years. I didn't even realize how much improvement I had made because I have such a hard time seeing it for myself and comparing it. Um, I don't know. It's like a blind spot. You don't really see it, or I couldn't really like I couldn't really see it until I pulled up some of my older stuff and really looked at it. But without doing that, I wouldn't have even noticed. You know what I mean? And so I do think it's important to hold on to older work so that you can compare it over time. Cookie Monster says, I have that too with sketchbooks. Yes, I used to have I still do. I don't really use sketchbooks anymore, I'll be honest. Uh, I, I don't, I just, yeah, I don't. For whatever reason, I mean, I have them. I bring them sometimes when I know, like, if I'm going on a trip and I won't be able to paint or whatever, I'll bring a sketchbook and I'll sketch a little here and there and so on. But yeah, I don't know. I always before I always used to have a hard time, and I would only work in oh, what's it called? I would prefer to work on like individual sheets of paper, and then over time, when I got into digital, you just digital's cheap. You can throw away as many sketches as you want, which honestly is kind of a shit thing because how will you keep older sketches and crappy sketches that um, if every time you're working digitally you just close and don't save those. I think it's really bad. I think having that the ability to track your improvement over time is huge. Um, I'm really glad I have a lot of those older drawings. I mean, now I don't really need them, but so much. But when you're younger in the process, it's way more valuable, I think. And now I still have my paintings, my older paintings from like a couple of years ago or a couple of years before that, and yeah, I can see a lot of improvement. Even on like really good ones, I can see improvement. Like I don't have it here, but I have that self-portrait, which is like a close-up of my face, and I'm really happy with that painting. Don't get me wrong, and it's really cool. That painting won. I won first place in the Jerry's Artorama, self-portrait thing with that, and there's a lot of cool elements to it. But um, yeah, I look at that and I'm like, and I'm not going to say I could do such a better job now. It's more um, there's just certain elements to it that I would have just made different decisions, to certain aspects of it. So it's not so much as the technical. aspect of it. It's just like I probably would have changed the composition. I would have slightly. I would have adjusted certain things, or whatever it might be. But you know, that's also part of it. And I do that when it comes to painting, more like certain types of artwork. There's is different in different capacity. But like for painting, the way I paint, you know, composition, learning, not just learning composition, but like the experience of, the composition, the lighting, the experience of like with your experience with reference, gathering reference, all of that is still skills that are related to the painting. It's just not about like how you handle the brush, but those are all still super, super important elements to making a good painting. Conley says the trick with digital uh, is is filing, in my opinion. I most always save my work, but figuring out how to save it so you can find practice sketches later has been tricky for me. It is tricky. There's a couple of programs um, that they're designed like as like sketchbooks specifically. Um, I don't know that they're the best programs, and I think most of them are for the iPad specifically, if I'm being honest. But it's kind of cool because the way it works is like you have a sketchbook, and every time you open it, it's like a new page of the book. So, you can have a sketchbook that's like sketches, or a sketchbook that's like, ink, and one that's watercolor, or whatever, however you want to do it. I've never, I say it's cool. I think they're cool. I've looked at them, but I've never used them because they don't meet like the things that I personally would like or need. But I like the concept. But still, then how do you flip through it? I don't know. I wonder if like maybe they have a limited amount of pages in them, and then you just kind of flip through them. You can, or date them. I think maybe I kind of like that idea. Conley says, like when I did a figure drawing with Pinky, I'd make separate layers for different sketches. Yeah, I used to do that too. That's one way a lot of people do is when they're doing like practice figure drawing digitally, they because you're also having to do everything quick, you just make a bunch of layers and then forget about it, you know what I mean? Even if you save it, it's like good luck, you'll never go through that. Or not never, but you know what I mean, like rarely. Yeah, that sucks. Conley says the problem with that is in programs like Photoshop, you can only see one layer as a thumbnail. He started making my starting file higher resolution and put a bunch of drawings in one page. Yeah, 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 absolutely. There are some things you can do with Photoshop, like you can make an action if you wanted to like take a file and explode it into separate each layer would become its own file type of thing to export it. Like there are ways of doing that, but it's not very elegant, and realistically you're not going to do that with everything, you know what I mean? It's just one of those things. Like you have to be very intentional and plan it. And a lot of artists I know aren't very intentional in that manner about that type of stuff. I know I wasn't, you know. So I think I've talked about this before, but there's this color called gold green that's very, very popular with some artists, and I was tempted to buy it. I know it's one of those, it's such a funny thing that artists do. I do this too, where it's like, oh, my favorite artist uses this colors or this color, so I want to try them out, as if using the same paints that they use or the same colors that they use will make me a better artist or anything. It won't. That's not how it works. But, having said that, there are some paints that are really cool, some paints that are, you know, better than others or more fun or offer certain, capabilities than others or whatever it is. Like I said, there is this paint, uh, green gold, which looks really interesting. It's like it's more of a greenish color. It kind of works like the nickel azo yellow, but not exactly. It's more of a greenish color, and then when you um, thin it out with white, it becomes, I think, more of a goldish color. Having said that, it has really crappy light fastness, so I never bought it. Uh, hey, Cassandra. Cassandra says you said that, but like, what if this time it does make a difference? LOL. Right? Well, like, so, it, I mean, it does make a difference in some capacity, right? Like, to give an example, um, there's an artist who I follow online. He does these paintings, and he uses some like uh, I think they're fluorescent colors or neon colors, whatever you want to call them. And it's like I couldn't paint what he paints and get the same feeling that he does out of it because I could never match those colors unless I buy those colors, right? Like there's a limitation there. So there is that. Having said that, the reason I don't buy those colors is because uh, they're fugitive and they will fade over time, probably pretty quickly, relatively speaking. I say that, but I do have some neon or fluorescent colors. I don't think it's the same ones he has. I think I have a different brand. I don't like the ones I have very much. I hate painting with them. They suck. I really hate painting with them. But yeah, they will fade over time. So it's like, yes, there are limitations. Um, and like some of these like green gold or some other transparent colors, or some transparent colors, or translucent colors that can create effects that you can't get any other way. So yeah, that will make you better, in the sense of like, if that's the effect you want to achieve, and you consider that a better painting because it has it in it, then yes, using those colors will make you a better painter specifically for that, right? Like it's true. There's some truth to that. Um, But yeah, green gold, from what I researched, this has issues with uh, its light fast ratings, and so I decided not to get it, not to, uh, you know, not to get it. It's very frustrating, you know. I'll be honest. Some people don't care about light fast issues. It's not a concern for them, and you know, I'm envious, and sometimes because I do really try to use stuff that I know will not fade. You know, to me, like there's some things that I care less about as far as like, will it last 100 years? You know, there's certain things that I don't care that much about, but the color, the fugitive colors, a lot of fugitive colors will fade way sooner than 100 years from now. You know what I mean? Like some of them, if you put it in the wrong place in a house with the wrong lighting, it can fade within a couple years, you know, and change the color. And I have a hard time with that. Cassandra says they can fade within a year sometimes, depending. Yeah, no, they absolutely can, depending on the color and depending on the light and the lighting. Yeah, it can fade within like a year at the like, you know, like low end. Obviously, it can take longer, but it can also be like a year. That's rough. Sandra says I couldn't agree more. Yeah, that I can't bring myself to use anything like that regularly. Like I have the fluorescent paints. They're cool. I did a painting with them. If I use them again, that's fine. But whoever, if I ever sell it, there will be a disclaimer that like this could fade. I have no idea how long it will last. It will lose its fluorescent or neon, you know, elements to it. Sandra says, I guess one way around it is to make prints and only sell those, but it sort of defeats the point. Yes. So the artist that I was originally referring to, that's one thing he does. He does make prints out of it, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with making prints of your work. Obviously, I do too. Um, but yeah, you know, you can also make prints digitally, right? Like you don't have to, you know, you don't have to stick to the oil paints. You know what I mean? Or you can make a painting and then pump up all the saturation and digitally, right? Like there's lots of ways of going about that. It just depends what you want, you know, what you want to do. But for me, uh, yeah, I do want to sell the originals because I think there's something very cool about the originals. And yeah, I can't get behind those paints. Generally speaking, like I said, if you know, um, if I do a painting like that, like yeah, some things are fleeting in life, and that's just the way it is, and that's fine. That's the only way I can produce the painting I want, then that's the only way you know, that's what'll happen. But that's okay. It's just being aware of it, you know, I guess is the main issue. Conley says, I heard something interesting about the issue of stop sign red fading. They actually use ceramic process to transfer, and that keeps the red vibrant somehow. Interesting. I mean, there are definitely ways of keeping things vibrant for longer, and there are ways to help it. Like, uh, there are UV coatings, for instance, um, and there are UV protective. So you could there's UV coatings, there's UV glass, there is UV what's it called varnish. But the issue is, as far as I know, there's no UV varnish that that you can put on an oil painting uh, within the first 6 months of like paint of the painting being dry. Like, I think all of them you have to wait like at least 6 months. So that means that you have to, if you do a painting, you can't sell it for the first 6 months until you varnish it with that stuff. And even that isn't, foolproof or guaranteed. It's just going to slow the process, right? Because the pigments just aren't light fast. Like, but in their nature, they're just not, and they will fade over time, as far as I know. As far, um, there are other types of paints that aren't oil paints that or other pigments that I think can like the stop sign thing that Don Lee was talking about, that they can resist fading for a lot longer. Um, but I don't think that you can use it like oil paints, so you can't create the same type of images with it. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, you can make something that will last forever, maybe, but you can't make paintings like you want that will, you know, last forever, I guess, is the issue. At least as far as my understanding goes. By the way, regarding the stop signs, I don't know if these are the official stop signs, like, or if these are like somehow unofficial stop signs, like they're not from the city or something. But I've been driving around Austin and I have seen a bunch of stop signs that are like absolutely faded. Like, I've seen a bunch that are faded to the point where you can't even see, like, you can barely see what's on it. Like a faded, super faded, like, it's not even pink because it's faded. It's a different type of like red, but it's barely there at this point. So yeah, I don't know that I don't think anything, unfortunately will last forever. Must be using a cheap process, maybe. Might, like I said, it might be a different type of sign or something. I don't know. Cassandra says, thankfully, they are very specific shape. Yes, that is true. That makes it a lot easier. That's one of the reasons that they, you know, are a specific shape, I think. Because this way, even people who, um, you know, people who are colorblind and can't read the language still know it's a stop sign. If at least they know it's a stop sign if they've learned what a stop sign is. But they can identify it, I guess, is the point. Uh, so I'm having a couple issues right now. One is the paint is very wet in some areas, so it's not coming off the brush very easily. The other issue is that a lot of these colors are so close together now that there's not a huge, huge difference between them. So the changes are very subtle now. For anyone who's curious about how do you paint wet into wet, if the painting's wet, how does they put color down? There's a few different ways, and um, there's a bunch of factors that affect how it happens. But it's like if you don't have enough paint on your brush, you'll often just lift up what's already there, or just basically make a mess. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of different ways. You can either paint into what's already there in a way where you're like mixing essentially on the canvas. You can kind of replace what's already there, depending if you have a stiff brush. Uh, and also you can just kind of like layer it on top. Usually you need a softer brush for that, and to load up your brush and also hold your brush more um, parallel to your painting surface than perpendicular. But yeah, also it depends, like, is the paint on your brush stiffer than the paint on the canvas? Because that can cause some problems. But yeah, I've had people talk about like, oh, I can't. Reason I don't like oil paint is because I have to wait. I hate having to wait for it to dry, and I was always, I'm always like, why would you wait for it to dry? I mean, don't get me wrong. There are definitely some instances where you have to wait for it to dry. I'm waiting. I have to wait for my self-portrait to dry to do the gold leafing, but that's a little different. The gold leaf is a little different. And sometimes there are reasons why you have to, but like I'd say 80% of the time, if not more, I don't need my painting to dry before I finish it. I mean, I will a lot of times, but I don't need that. I could do a whole painting if I had the time, or it's small enough. I have done and can do a whole painting wet into wet, from start to finish, the whole thing's still wet. It's not a problem. I never understood why people have an issue with the drying time of oil paint, as far as that's concerned. Oh, who is that? Ooh, I gotta stop my recording because my camera will overheat if I continue it. I didn't realize that. Man, the time just flies sometimes. Winnie, Winnie. My cat wants attention. Actually, she wants dinner, is what she wants. Winnie, let me see if she'll come. Win. If I go to her, she'll just run away right now. She's not coming over. Winnie baby, yeah, no, she won't come over though. Conley says, "Oh yeah, I mean, you had to paint what into what when you were practicing for Artist of the Year." Yeah, well, a lot of the paintings I did, what was it, last year or the year before, when I was trying to do a painting a day, they were all done in a day, and they were done quickly. So it was like they were all done wet into wet. A lot of the paintings behind me were all done wet into wet. It's very rare. I mean, like I said, there are some techniques where sometimes you need it to be dry first. If you, um, I will say, if you want to stamp something on top of something, it's helpful for it to be dry first. Stuff like that. But a lot of it you can do wet into wet. So, but whatever people think. I saw this video. I don't remember if I saved it or not. I was tempted to make a response. I just didn't have the time. But this artist was talking about why she like switched to acrylics. And here's the thing, right? Like, to be very clear, if a medium like clicks and just does it for you, there's nothing wrong with that. If that medium is acrylics, if it's whatever it is, doesn't matter. Like, that's fine. You don't need to have a reason or an excuse for loving a particular medium, right? Because art isn't about like which of the mediums is actually the best, and it's not about which is the most practical, right? Like, sometimes it's not the most practical. Cassandra says he's saying this particularly for my benefit. No, I'm not. Cassandra, I absolutely am not. Cassandra uses acrylic, but she uses open acrylics. She really should. Cassandra, I think personally, I think you'd enjoy oils more, but it's whatever. That's me personally. For you specifically, but that's neither here nor there. My point was, you don't need to have a reason. Like, if if watercolors is your thing, watercolors is your thing. If it's pastels, then freaking do pastels. I've seen some artists do amazing things with pastels that I would be like, I could never do this with this medium. Like, it just wouldn't click in my brain that way. But that's fine. It's not about that. But yeah, this artist was like giving the benefits of why she prefers acrylics, and I just was like, if you prefer something, you prefer it. You don't, like I said, you don't need to excuse it. However, if you're going to give reasons and be specific enough with the reason, like, for instance, I like oil paints because they stay wet for a very long time, and that gives me more time to blend things together, and I don't get a lot of dry brush effects. And you can say, cool, but you can use open acrylics, or you can use retarder medium to help acrylics dry slower, and that will give you a similar effect. And that's partially true. Not entirely accurate, but it is partially true. So if someone says, I like acrylics because they dry faster, yeah, like, they do dry faster, cool. But if you say, I like acrylics because they blend better, I might disagree with you there, right? Like, if you say, I like acrylics more because they're cheaper, I might say, yeah, that's true. Maybe. I don't know. I'd have to look at it. But I think oil paints generally last longer because they don't dry up, and you end up, like, a little goes a lot further. stuff like that. So I did want to do a response to her video, but I didn't get around to it, and I don't know that I ever will. But it was interesting to hear. Either way, some things I just thought were incorrect, like saying like oils are, one of the things is that like oil paints are toxic. It's like, no, pigments are toxic. Oil paints do use toxic pigments. Other paints also use toxic pigments, and you don't have to use solvents if you're afraid of them, and you don't have ventilation. But acrylics, you also have to be careful of ventilation. So it's not, it's not something like that excuse or that reasoning isn't sound reasoning, in my opinion. Cookie Monster says using a wide variety of media contributes to your artistic development anyways. Absolutely, and I think people should use a lot of different tools to to try things out. I absolutely think so. You learn a lot from it. There's you know absolutely nothing wrong with that. You learn so much from different mediums and different ways of working. I used to work mostly in the watercolor, then I worked mostly digital, and then I tried. I used to paint in acrylics when I went to art school, um, but I did a different technique where you were doing basically a bunch of layering and translucent passes. I don't want to work that way anymore, but I know about it at least. So yeah. Anyways, that's all very, roundabout way of saying like we'll see if I ever get to that response video. Having said that, it's been 2.5 hours since I started streaming, and it's time for me to go feed the cats because they are literally like when I step outside my room right now, it's like gargoyles just waiting for me to come feed them. So I'm going to call it a day. I will be back on Sunday. Yes, Sunday. I'll be back Sunday. Yeah. Let's call it a day. Yeah, Cookie Monster, absolutely. Have a great rest of your week, everyone. Have a great weekend, and happy 4th, everybody who celebrates. And yeah, like I said, I'll be back Sunday. Bye, everyone.